The glow from my wife's phone started showing up in our bedroom before I was ready to admit what it meant. At first it was just light in the dark. Then it became a pattern. Then it became the only thing in that room that still seemed to make her happy. My name's Owen. I'm 39, I work as a logistics coordinator for a food distribution company outside Nashville, and for most of my marriage I believed problems got solved by paying attention early. If something felt off, you talked about it. If distance started creeping in, you didn't wait until it turned the whole house cold. That was how I'd always lived. Fix things before they rot. Show up. Stay steady. Don't let pride do damage that honesty could prevent. That mindset served me well at work. It didn't do a damn thing for my marriage. My wife, Hannah, and I had been married for 11 years. No kids. Just us in a brick ranch house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac with a patchy backyard and a bedroom that slowly started feeling less like a place where two people slept and more like a waiting room where one person scrolled until the other gave up. Hannah worked in marketing for a regional healthcare company. Mostly remote, sometimes in the office downtown, lots of email, Zoom calls, project deadlines, strategy decks, all the polished corporate stuff that made her sound energized around coworkers and completely drained by the time I got home. At least that was the explanation I kept giving myself. Because early on, that was what I told myself about everything. The first few years of our marriage were easy in the way people don't appreciate enough when they're living them. Nothing wild. Nothing worth posting online. Just good. She used to meet me in the kitchen when I got home and ask about my day like the answer actually mattered. We'd eat dinner on the couch sometimes, split takeout, argue over what to watch, fall asleep halfway through movies with her legs thrown across mine. She used to reach for me at night without thinking. A hand on my stomach. Her foot hooked over my ankle. Small things, but those are the real things. That's what marriage actually feels like when it's alive. Then, slowly, the small things started disappearing. At first it looked harmless enough. Hannah got busier. Her company went through some kind of restructuring, and suddenly every week seemed to bring a new reason she was mentally tapped out. One campaign rolled into another. Her boss changed. Deadlines stacked up. Meetings ran late. I listened. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? That's your wife. If she says she's overwhelmed, you don't interrogate her like a suspect. You try to make life easier. So I did. I cooked more. Picked up groceries without being asked. Took over the laundry most weeks. Tried not to make a big deal out of the fact that her attention had started feeling rented, not given. I figured if I gave her enough room to breathe, eventually she'd come back into the marriage on her own. Instead, she started disappearing while sitting right next to me. The bedroom changed first. That's always harder to talk about than people think. Everybody makes it about sex because that's the obvious headline, but that wasn't really it. Not fully. What hurt was the feeling of becoming untouchable in your own marriage. The feeling that your wife's body had started treating your closeness like one more demand on her energy. Some nights I'd get into bed beside her and try something small. A hand on her hip. A kiss on her shoulder. Just contact. Just my wife's skin under my hand after a long day. She'd tense up almost immediately. Not dramatically. Just enough to make it clear I was interrupting some invisible process she cared about more than me. Then came the usual lines. She was tired. Her head hurt. She had an early meeting. She was just not in the mood tonight. Tonight turned into most nights. Then most nights turned into almost all of them. What made it worse was how routine the rejection got. No fighting. No big emotional conversation. Just the same quiet sequence over and over. I'd reach. She'd pull away. She'd roll over. Then 30 seconds later that phone screen would light up the room. That was the part I couldn't stop noticing. Hannah always used her phone. Everybody does. I'm not one of those guys who thinks a woman picking up her phone means the marriage is over. But this was different. The timing was too perfect. Too consistent. She'd reject me, roll onto her side, and suddenly she'd have all the alertness in the world. Her thumb moving. Tiny smiles. Sometimes a little breathy laugh she didn't mean to let out. The exact kind of warmth I hadn't seen directed at me in months. At first I asked about it. Gently. Careful not to sound accusing. I'd ask if work was really that crazy. Ask if she was okay. Ask whether she wanted to talk about whatever was keeping her up. She'd say it was nothing. Just stress. Just decompressing. Just scrolling because her brain wouldn't shut off. If I asked what she was looking at, she'd say Instagram, or TikTok, or some dumb thread from work. Then she'd kiss my shoulder like that ended the conversation, and I'd lie there staring into the dark while that little square of light kept pulsing against the wall. There's a specific kind of loneliness in that. Being 3 feet from your wife while she smiles into a screen like she's somewhere better. I tried to fight it at first. Not with anger. With effort. I booked a dinner reservation at that Italian place she liked near the river. She was polite through the whole meal, even pleasant, but checked her phone twice between appetizers and the main course. One night I suggested a weekend cabin trip, just 2 days out by the lake, no distractions. She said maybe later when work calmed down. Work never calmed down. Or maybe it did and I just wasn't the person she wanted waiting on the other side of it. I even tried talking directly once. It was a Tuesday in late spring. We were both in the kitchen, and the air between us already had that careful feeling it gets when two people have been skimming past each other for too long. I told her I missed her. Just that. Not a speech. Not a list of complaints. I said I felt like I was losing my wife in inches and I didn't know how to stop it. She leaned against the counter, folded her arms, and gave me the tired expression people use when they think your pain is about to become extra work for them. Then she said I was being dramatic. Said marriage goes through dry spells. Said not everything had to mean something. Said if I stopped keeping score, maybe things would feel less heavy. I remember standing there with one hand still on the fridge handle, realizing my honesty had somehow just been converted into another flaw she needed me to fix. After that, I stopped asking. Not because I stopped caring. Because I got tired of handing her my hurt and watching her label it inconvenience. So I went quiet. And the quieter I got, the more I started seeing. Hannah became more protective of that phone. Not in an obvious, cartoonish way. Just enough. Face down on the nightstand. Screen angled away from me if I came around the couch. Taken into the bathroom more often. Never left in the kitchen when she went to shower like she used to. It was subtle enough to deny and clear enough to feel. The phone also changed her mood in ways I couldn't ignore. She could go an entire evening answering me in one-word fragments, then glance down at the screen and suddenly there'd be life in her face again. Not a huge smile. That might have been easier to confront. No, it was smaller than that. Softer. Private. Like whoever was reaching her through that screen had access to a version of her I hadn't seen in a long time. One Friday night in July, I came home exhausted after a 14-hour day dealing with a refrigeration delay that turned half my afternoon into a mess. I was still mentally at work when I walked in, still wearing the tight feeling in my shoulders that comes from solving everybody else's problems all day long. Hannah was already in bed, lamp off, screen light on, half under the blankets. I brushed my teeth, got changed, and slid in beside her. I put my hand lightly on her waist. She pulled it off without looking at me and said she really couldn't do this tonight. Not angry. Not emotional. Just flat. Like she was declining a calendar invite. I rolled onto my back and stared at the ceiling for a few seconds. Then I turned and asked her, as calmly as I could, what exactly this even meant anymore. She sighed, still looking at her phone, and said I was exhausting her. That word lodged somewhere deep. Exhausting. Not because I was yelling. Not because I was accusing. Because I still wanted to feel like a husband instead of a tolerated inconvenience in my own bed. I didn't say anything after that. I just rolled over and faced the wall. A few seconds later, her screen lit brighter behind me. I could see it reflected faintly in the window across the room. Her thumb moved. Then came that small smile again. Not for me. Not even near me. Just somewhere behind me in the dark. And that was the night I stopped telling myself it was only work stress. Because stress doesn't make a woman look more alive the second she turns away from her husband. It just gives her a convenient excuse to explain why she already is. Once I stopped asking questions, the house got even quieter. Not peaceful quiet. Not the kind married people settle into after a long day when nothing needs to be said because everything important already feels understood. This was different. Measured. Careful. Like we were both moving around something neither of us wanted to name, except one of us already knew exactly what it was. Hannah didn't seem bothered by my silence at first. If anything, she looked relieved. That stung more than I expected. Because for months I had been trying to keep us connected, even badly, even awkwardly, and the second I stopped reaching, it was like I had removed some minor inconvenience from her schedule. She still talked to me, but only when the topic had edges she could control. Grocery list. A package on the porch. Her mother's birthday dinner the following week. Whether I had called the HVAC guy about the upstairs vent making that rattling sound. No warmth. No curiosity. No sign that she noticed the difference between a husband and a man who happened to split utilities with her. But the phone noticed. That was the part I couldn't stop seeing. The more distant Hannah got with me, the more alive she seemed with that screen in her hand. She'd move through an entire evening like her battery was dead, then glance down at one message and come back to life in increments. A softened face. A hidden smile. A quick exhale through her nose like something amused her more than she wanted the room to know. It was never huge. Never obvious enough to grab and hold up as evidence. Just enough to make me feel like I was standing outside my own marriage, watching another version of my wife flicker on for someone else. I started noticing when it happened most. Late at night, obviously. That was the big one. But also around lunch. Around 4:30 in the afternoon. And weirdly, right before bed, when she'd go into the bathroom with her phone and stay in there longer than the routine actually required. Teeth brushing does not take 15 minutes. Skincare doesn't need a locked door and a smile you forgot to shut off before coming back to bed. One Wednesday, I got home earlier than usual because a shipment issue cleared faster than expected. I walked in around 3:40 and heard her in the kitchen before she knew I was home. Not on a work call. Just talking. Softly. That alone would have been enough to make me pause, because Hannah did almost nothing softly around me anymore. I stayed still in the entryway and listened. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard her laugh. Then I heard her say, in that low voice people use when they already feel understood, "No, you did not." I stood there with my hand still on my keys, every muscle in my shoulders tightening. Then the floor creaked under my boot. The conversation ended instantly. By the time I stepped into the kitchen, she was alone at the counter with her phone face down beside her coffee mug. Calm expression. Controlled breathing. Entire scene reset so quickly it would have almost been impressive if it hadn't been happening in my house. I asked who she was talking to. She said nobody. Just a voice note from work. That answer should have sounded ridiculous. It did. But the way she said it, flat, already annoyed, already halfway into making me the problem if I pushed, was familiar enough that I just nodded and grabbed a bottle of water. That became the pattern. Every time I got close to something real, she'd hand me something thin and say it like I was supposed to be embarrassed for noticing it didn't hold. A few nights later, we went to dinner with her sister, Rachel, and Rachel's husband, Dean. Casual place, burgers and beer, the kind of night that used to be easy for us. Hannah was more animated there than she had been at home in weeks. Not with me. With them. She laughed, told stories, even reached across the table once to show Rachel something on her phone. I caught a flash of the screen before she tilted it away. A message thread. Dark background. White text bubbles. No names visible from where I sat, but not social media. Not a reel. Not some random meme. A conversation. I watched her the rest of the meal more carefully after that. Twice, her phone buzzed against the table. Twice, she glanced down fast enough to satisfy whatever need pulled at her, then tucked it beside her thigh like she was smoothing a napkin. Each time, her mouth changed for half a second. Small, private smile. Gone before anyone else could notice. Anyone else maybe. Not me. On the drive home, I asked if work was blowing up again. She stared out the passenger window and said it was always something lately. I asked if that was who she kept messaging. She turned and looked at me then, not guilty, just irritated that I was still awake to the details of my own life. Then she said I was getting obsessive and she didn't have the energy for another weird conversation. Obsessive. That word sat in the car between us the rest of the drive. Because once a person starts hiding something, your awareness becomes their evidence against you. You're not observant. You're obsessive. Not hurt. Insecure. Not trying to understand. Just making everything harder than it needs to be. By the next week, I had stopped trying to engage at all. That wasn't surrender. It was strategy, even if I didn't call it that yet. I came home. I ate dinner. I talked when spoken to. I took out the trash. I handled the bills. And I watched. The more normal I acted, the more careless she got. Not fully careless. Hannah wasn't reckless. That was part of what made the whole thing feel worse. Whatever was happening, it was being managed. Timed. Tucked into the seams of ordinary life with enough precision that it could keep breathing as long as I kept doubting myself. Then came the first thing I couldn't talk myself out of. It was a Monday, around 11:30. I remember because I had checked the clock on the cable box after waking up. I'm usually a solid sleeper, but that night I came up just enough to notice the room was bright. Not fully bright. Just that low artificial glow that makes a dark bedroom feel wrong. Hannah was on her side, facing away from me. Her phone was inches from her face. I lay still and watched the light pulse against the wall. Then I heard it. A tiny laugh. Barely more than air. The kind a woman makes when she is not tired at all. Without thinking, I shifted slightly and reached toward her, just enough to rest my hand on the blanket near her hip. I didn't even touch skin. Didn't ask for anything. Didn't say a word. She jerked away like I had interrupted something intimate. That reaction hit harder than the rejection itself. Because it wasn't the movement of a tired wife wanting space. It was the movement of someone pulled too abruptly out of another emotional room. I took my hand back immediately. She muttered that I scared her and said she was just checking one last email before bed. One last email. At 11:30. Smiling. I said okay and turned back toward my side of the bed. But I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there listening to the faint tap of her thumb on the screen, the occasional quiet exhale, the almost laughter she kept swallowing down, and by morning I knew something had shifted in me for good. I wasn't trying to fix a dry spell anymore. I was waiting for the moment her secret stopped fitting inside the dark. The next morning, I started keeping track. Not because I wanted to become suspicious in some loud, obvious way. I didn't start checking her bag or inventing reasons to grab her phone. I just stopped letting the details slide past me the way I had for months. When someone you love keeps making you feel crazy for noticing obvious changes, eventually the only way to stay sane is to start trusting your own memory more than their explanations. So I paid attention. I noticed Hannah checked that phone most heavily in 3 windows, right after lunch, right before I usually got home, and late at night after the lights were off. I noticed she smiled at it most on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which happened to be the same 2 days she claimed work was most chaotic. I noticed she stopped leaving it in the kitchen entirely. If she went to the laundry room, the phone went with her. If she went to shower, it sat on the bathroom counter. If she walked the trash out to the bin, she took it in her sweatshirt pocket like somebody might use those 40 seconds to rewrite her life without permission. The more I noticed, the uglier it felt. Because none of this looked like random doom scrolling anymore. It looked like anticipation. It looked like somebody else had access to the soft, amused, awake version of my wife while I got the one who acted like basic closeness was another task on her list. I still didn't confront her. That was deliberate. A man only gets one clean shot at the truth once he knows he's dealing with lies, and I wasn't going to waste mine on half-proof and a defensive argument about privacy. If I pushed too early, Hannah would wipe whatever was there, lock down harder, and turn the whole thing into a conversation about trust while standing in the ruins of the trust she had already broken. So I stayed quiet and got sharper. A few days later, I got my first real break. It was Thursday. I had a driver call out sick, one shipment arrive short, and a vendor on the phone blaming my team for something that had absolutely not been our mistake. By the time I got home, my head felt like it had been packed with steel wool. Hannah was in the home office finishing up, door half closed, laptop glow on her face. I dropped my keys in the bowl, went to the kitchen, and poured water. Then I heard her say his name. Not clearly at first. Just a voice from the other room shifting into that lower, softer tone she kept using when she thought I couldn't hear her. I stood there by the sink and listened harder. This time I caught it. "Evan, stop." She laughed when she said it. Not irritated. Not work professional. Playful. I went completely still. Evan. I had never heard that name before in 11 years of marriage. Not as a coworker. Not as a client. Not as somebody from her department. And what hit me hardest wasn't even the name itself. It was how familiar it sounded in her mouth. Like she had said it many times already. Like it belonged there. A second later, the office chair rolled back. I moved fast, opened the fridge, and acted like I'd been deciding between leftovers and takeout my whole life. Hannah stepped out of the office holding her laptop and phone, saw me in the kitchen, and froze for half a second before smoothing her face. "You're home," she said. I told her traffic had been lighter. She nodded once, too quickly, and asked if I wanted pasta or if I'd rather order something. Her voice had already gone flat again. Businesslike. Reset. I asked who Evan was. The question landed hard enough that even she couldn't hide it completely. Not with words. With timing. She took just a beat too long before answering. Then she said it was some analyst from another team she'd been dealing with on a campaign report. Some analyst. That answer told me 2 things immediately. 1, she was prepared to minimize him. 2, he mattered enough that she needed a version of him ready. I said he sounded funny. She looked at me then. Really looked. Trying to figure out how much I had heard. Then she shrugged and said work would be miserable if people didn't joke around sometimes. And there it was again. That redirect. That casual little sweep back into harmless territory. Same trick, different lie. I let it go. That night in bed, I didn't touch her. Didn't ask anything. Didn't even pretend to be trying. I just lay on my side, eyes closed, and listened. The room stayed dark for a long time. Then, around 11:20, her screen lit up behind me. I waited. A few seconds later, that tiny laugh again. Then a whisper. I couldn't hear the words. Just the shape of them. Soft enough that they belonged to intimacy, not logistics. She wasn't on speaker, so maybe it was a voice note, maybe a call with the volume low, maybe she was just replying out loud to something he said in text. Whatever it was, it chilled me because it sounded secret in the way married life is supposed to protect you from ever having to hear. The next morning, after she left for work, I did something I had spent weeks telling myself I wouldn't do. I checked the cell phone bill. Not because I was proud of it. Because I was done pretending good men are obligated to stay blind once their own house starts lying to them. We were on a shared account, and I knew the login because I handled most of the utilities and recurring bills. The call log wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. I wasn't looking for poetry. I was looking for patterns. I found one within minutes. One number repeated far more than the others. Short calls during the day. Longer ones in the evening. A 23-minute call the previous Tuesday at 10:48 p.m. Another at 11:07 Thursday night. Several 7- and 9-minute calls during lunch hours. Enough to be constant. Enough to be personal. Enough that no woman in a marriage should still be calling it just work with a straight face. I copied the number into my notes. Then I just sat there at the kitchen table staring at it while the refrigerator hummed and a lawn crew started up somewhere down the street. A number doesn't look like betrayal at first. It looks sterile. Harmless. Just digits. But when those digits line up with the nights your wife turns away from you in bed and comes alive in the dark for someone else, they stop being neutral. They become structure. Proof that your instincts were not insecurity. Just delayed recognition. I wanted to call it right then. I really did. Not from my phone. From a blocked number. Just to hear a voice. A man's voice. Something that would force the whole ugly picture into full focus. But I didn't. Because if he picked up and realized something was off, word would get back to Hannah before I had enough to keep her from shaping the story first. So I kept digging. That Saturday, Hannah said she needed to run to the office for an hour, max, because one of her presentation decks had somehow gone missing graphics and Monday's meeting would be a disaster if she didn't fix it. She said it with that weary little corporate frustration she wore so well. The kind that always made her sound burdened and responsible at the same time. I told her okay. Then I waited 10 minutes after she left and got in my truck. I wasn't proud of it either. But by then, pride had become a luxury for people whose wives still slept facing them. Her office was downtown in a mid-rise with mirrored glass and a parking deck behind it. I knew the building. Had dropped her off there once when her car was in the shop. When I got close, I saw her car in the garage almost immediately. That part gave me one stupid flash of relief. Maybe she had told the truth. Maybe I was just a man with too much data and not enough trust left to interpret it kindly. Then I parked 2 rows over and waited. 20 minutes passed. No sign of her heading inside the building. At the 26-minute mark, a dark blue SUV pulled into the row beside hers. A man got out. Late 30s maybe. Tall. Athletic in a clean, normal way. Not flashy. Not trying too hard. The kind of face people describe as friendly because it makes them feel calm faster than it should. He checked his phone, looked toward her car, and smiled. Then Hannah stepped out from the passenger side of his SUV. Not her office. Not missing graphics. Passenger side. I felt everything inside me go cold. She hadn't even driven there herself. That detail hurt more than the rest for a second because it meant a level of comfort I had been trying not to imagine. Not just messages. Not just calls. Logistics. Shared movement. Time already spent together before they even reached the place where they'd chosen to separate cars. He handed her something through the open door. Coffee. She took it smiling. That smile again. The one I kept getting shut out of. Then he said something I couldn't hear, and she laughed before lightly touching his wrist. Not a desperate touch. Not some exaggerated affair movie moment. Just intimate enough to reveal history. Familiar enough to flatten me in my seat. I ducked lower instinctively even though they were too far to notice me. They stood there talking beside the cars for maybe a minute and a half. Then he leaned in and kissed her. Not tentative. Not first time nervous. Not two people surprised by their own chemistry. Comfortable. Practiced. She kissed him back like there was nothing in the world to figure out. Then she got into her own car, still smiling, and drove off. I sat in that garage long after both vehicles were gone. Engine off. Hands loose in my lap. Heart not pounding anymore because somehow this was past panic. Past suspicion. Past the stage where my brain needed to protect me with uncertainty. The late night light in the bedroom. The little laughs. The guarded phone. The flat rejection every time I reached for her. The new name. The call logs. The fake office trip. It all landed at once with this brutal, quiet finality. My wife hadn't just been smiling at her phone. She had been carrying another man into her bed every night and making me feel unreasonable for noticing the room was already crowded. I didn't confront Hannah in that parking garage. That's the part some people would probably do differently. They'd step out of the truck, slam a door hard enough to turn heads, and force the truth into the open right there between concrete pillars and oil stains. Maybe I would have once. Maybe before months of being treated like a tolerated inconvenience in my own bed had worn all the heat out of me. But sitting there watching my wife kiss another man after lying about going into the office, I didn't feel wild. I felt clear. And clarity can be colder than anger. So I let her leave. I waited until her car was gone, then until his SUV was gone, then another full minute after that because I needed the garage to empty out before I trusted myself to move. When I finally started the truck, my hands were steady. That surprised me. I thought they'd shake. I thought I'd feel the adrenaline, the nausea, the movie version of betrayal. What I felt instead was this deep, exhausted stillness. Because the truth, ugly as it was, had ended the worst part. The guessing. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Every red light gave me another chance to replay it, Hannah stepping out of the passenger side, not her own car. The coffee in her hand. The way she touched his wrist. The kiss that looked like it had happened enough times to be ordinary. All the late-night glows in our bedroom suddenly had a body attached to them. A face. A routine. A man who had been living in the dark edges of my marriage long before I ever heard his name. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I already knew how the night was going to go. Not every word. But the shape of it. She'd come home and try to act normal first. That had become her specialty. If I confronted her, she'd deny what she thought she could deny, minimize what she couldn't, and make a quick attempt to move the conversation away from what she had done and toward how I found out. People like clean moral rules right up until they're the ones stepping over them. I went inside, took my keys out of my pocket, and set them in the bowl by the door. The house was exactly as we'd left it that morning. Her mug in the sink. Throw blanket still folded over the arm of the couch. A candle on the mantel she never remembered to light but liked having there because it looked finished. Same house. Same quiet. Different truth inside it. I didn't pack anything. I didn't throw anything. I just sat at the kitchen table and waited. Hannah came in a little after 6. She looked almost relaxed when she walked through the door. Purse over one shoulder, phone in hand, that work-tired expression already arranged on her face like she'd been wearing it in the car rehearsing whatever version of her day she planned to give me. She kicked off her shoes, saw me at the table, and hesitated just a fraction too long. Then she said hi. Just like that. Like she hadn't spent the afternoon kissing another man after weeks of telling me work stress was the reason she turned cold the second I touched her. I told her to sit down. She didn't ask why right away. That told me more than if she had. People ask why when they think they still have room. She was already reading the room for danger. Still, she sat. I looked at her for a second before I said anything, and what got me was how familiar her face still was. Same woman I had built 11 years around. Same woman who used to laugh into my shoulder in movie theaters. Same woman whose foot used to hook over my ankle in bed before all that warmth got rerouted into a screen I wasn't meant to understand. Betrayal doesn't make someone look different. That's part of what makes it so hard to absorb. Then I asked who Evan was. Every bit of color left her face. Not all at once, but enough. She tried confusion first. Asked what I meant. Asked why I was bringing up somebody from work in that tone. So I told her I knew he wasn't just somebody from work. I told her I knew the office trip was a lie. I told her I saw her in the parking garage. I told her I saw her get out of his SUV, take his coffee, touch his wrist, and kiss him like this wasn't new. That ended the performance. She looked down at the table and stayed there a long time. Then she cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just tears starting before the words did, like maybe she thought the tears would make the truth sound more accidental than it was. I let the silence sit. Finally, she said his name like I didn't already know it. Evan. A strategy manager on one of the campaign teams she worked with. They started talking more a few months earlier when her department got thrown into some cross-functional mess during the restructuring. At first it was just work. Then personal stuff started bleeding in. Long calls after meetings. Texts during the day. "He just got me," she said, which is one of those phrases people use when they want emotional betrayal to sound like something that happened to them instead of something they kept feeding. I asked how long. She said a few months. I asked how long since it turned physical. That took longer. Then she whispered, 3 weeks. 3 weeks. The number hit me harder than I expected because it gave shape to everything. 3 weeks of late night lying in our bedroom. 3 weeks of her rolling away from me and smiling into that screen after making me feel needy for still wanting closeness from my wife. 3 weeks of me lying there next to a woman already emotionally and physically elsewhere while she told me I was exhausting for noticing the distance. I asked whether that was why she kept rejecting me every night. That was the question that broke her face. Because cheating is one truth. The dead bedroom attached to it is another. It meant I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't been overthinking. I hadn't been too sensitive. My wife had been taking intimacy away from our marriage while giving it to someone else and making me feel selfish for missing it. She said she didn't know how to handle both things at once. That sentence told me everything I needed to know about how little room she had left in her mind for me. Not the husband whose dignity she was crushing a little every night. Just one more thing to manage while the affair felt exciting and uncomplicated. Then came the part that hurt in a quieter way. She said she never meant for it to go this far. People always say that. As if distance just happens. As if lies just happen. As if late-night calls and secret smiles and fake office errands and the passenger side of another man's SUV just happen. Nothing about what she did was careless. It was layered. Timed. Protected. She had built a second emotional life and kept it breathing in the same room where I was asking her what had happened to us. I asked if she loved him. She cried harder and said she didn't know. Honestly, that answer didn't matter anymore. Love, lust, excitement, escape. Pick whichever word sounds best in a confession. None of them changed the fact that she had taken another man into our marriage one notification at a time. I told her we were done. Not because I wanted to say something dramatic. Because by then it was just the cleanest sentence left in the room. She said we could fix it. She said she had been lost. Stressed. Lonely. She said she knew she'd hurt me. Said she was sorry. Said she would cut it off, go to counseling, do whatever it took. But that's the problem with being treated like the backup version of your own marriage for too long. By the time the other person finally gets scared enough to offer repair, something inside you has already gone quiet in a way that doesn't reverse. I told her to pack a bag and stay with her sister for a while. That was the first time all evening she looked truly stunned. Not because she didn't deserve it. Because I don't think she had fully believed consequences would arrive this cleanly. She thought there would be more talking, more confusion, more chances to soften me back into waiting. There weren't. She left that night with one suitcase and red eyes and a face I would have once crossed any distance to comfort. I watched from the doorway as she loaded her car, then I went back inside and locked it. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No shouting. No smashed glass. No dramatic midnight calls. Just paperwork, long conversations with a lawyer, separate accounts, awkward explanations to family that got edited differently depending on who was asking. Evan disappeared as quickly as men like that usually do once the fantasy gets dragged into real life. I heard that from Hannah herself weeks later when she asked if we could talk one last time. Apparently once the secrecy was gone, so was most of what made him feel special. That didn't give me satisfaction. Just confirmation. Looking back, the phone wasn't the problem. The smiling wasn't even the problem. The real betrayal was that my wife made me feel unreasonable for sensing her absence while she was already giving the best parts of herself to someone else in the dark right beside me.